We have a lot to go over from what happened today with the crypto bill, why you're seeing Bitcoin tank. Really very interesting here is just how we're starting to slope down, and we can just see the higher high here. So we know that this is a negative divergence. We're going to get a lot of conflicting data right now, and I just want to show this because I do think it's important. I don't usually use the break of the moving average. I think it's fitting because you're over that 70 line. So that's caution to me. I want to go through some short-term trading strategies that are working. We have to go through CPI today because it's probably the most misunderstood thing out there. Subscribe to the channel, click all notifications, and if you are on the wait list to get in the community, please look for your invitation because a bunch of them did go out. Let's do it. So let's start with the facts. This is exactly what has transpired. You have core inflation month over month, 0.2. The previous was 0.1. 0.3 is consensus. Core is without food and energy. So without food and energy, this is what happened very, very clearly. Then we go down the year over year, and you can see 2.9 versus 3. Inflation, 3. Consensus, 3. Consensus 2.7. So what gives? What's the issue? Well, we upticked. We knew we were going to uptick because the consensus told us that we were going to uptick. So why in God's name would anybody be surprised by this, which is what they want us to believe with the news that we're seeing. Now you can look here obviously in the absolute value area, and you can see the consensus on the absolute was higher than expected. Here's 3.225, 3.2256. Is that something? We could find a lot of hairs to split here. What I think you got to get into is a little bit in what's going on with shelter, because that was the big issue in home furnishing. But I wanted to start here and go, what exactly happened today? And if we look at the numbers, we thought they'd come in lower, and we were looking for core, and it did. It did come in lower. And that's what we wanted to say, and then the market did what it did. A couple reasons for why the market did what it did today, but I want to focus on the CPI because that's going to take us into PPI tomorrow. So if we take a look at PPI month over month, 0.2, 0.1. So we're expecting it to uptick again tomorrow. So if it upticks tomorrow, we shouldn't be shocked. And the reason I'm kind of laughing is because when you see some of these articles, they're surprisingly shocked that it upticked. Core year over year, 2.7. Previous was 3. I just think this is pretty interesting that, we're looking for an uptick here, but we're not looking for an uptick year over year. And then, of course, the PPI numbers. So what, again, does all this mean? We have to see how this plays out. But remember, PPI is what it costs them to make the burrito. CPI is what we pay for the burrito. So all the ingredients, your tomato, whatever you guys get in there, you crazy kids, and then they sell us the burrito and that is CPI. Here's what was so fascinating, at least to me. This is July, and you can see the July meetings right up here, and you can see the chance of an ease is 2.6, but you were at a 6% chance before this, and now you're at a 2.6. And I just think it's interesting because you came in better than expected, and yet the probability of a rate cut decreased. Now, they're blaming this on home furnishings, but I think they're just blaming it for something to blame it on, quite frankly, because at the same time, they pushed out that you're going to see inflation, and they oversold or sold, in my opinion, and sold way too much of the IWM today. But we're going to get to that in a second. Now in front of you, I got a lot of comments on these, so we're going to start using them more. This is Macro Micro. I have no affiliation with them whatsoever. That's their website, which is different. There's a .me after it instead of the .com, which apparently is a different site. But just so you know, I have no affiliation with them, but I think they do a good job. All right, if we take a look here, we're looking at the shelter and we're looking at the vacancy rate. Shelter, blue, vacancy rate, red. And what we're seeing are these areas of crossing. And I went back all the way to back in the day, all the way back to the 50s and where these areas have crossed. And what we're looking for here is just an area where we've seen a cross before, which kind of looks like that 84, 85 area into 90. And then all of a sudden the vacancy rates are significantly higher than the rents, and then the rents are obviously, the shelter, obviously the cost is going up. So it looks like you're setting up for another flip here. Why is this important? It's important because it's telling you that your vacancy rate is about to flip over the cost of shelter, which means that pricing for shelter should continue to drop quite precipitously. I think it's pretty realistic to assume that when you have more vacancies, that the price of shelter will come down. If you look at how it flipped in here, this went on for decades. It's not rocket science. I mean, you can say it. It stayed here and it just stagnated in this area once we got above that on the vacancy rate. It's not really, again, rocket science, but you can see it in here as well, versus when the vacancy rates were low, what happened to the cost of living. So if this flips, then the cost of living or the cost of shelter should drop, and therefore CPI should drop, considering that shelter is about 33% of CPI. And that's going to tie us into a couple other things here that are important. With shelter, just looking at it in and of itself, we're looking at this one section. And what we're trying to figure out is exactly, is it dropping or is it not? Well, we all see that it's dropping. And if we just kind of come across and just look at this level, I'll try to make that as straight as I possibly can and just drop it. You're really at the same level on where you were on a price increase where you were back in 07, and then you fell off a cliff, obviously, and then you tried to rally, and then obviously it was lower for a period of time. But you're really coming right back to that pandemic area. And once you're below that, and like anything else from that time period, it should free fall. That's usually what tends to happen. But you're right in line on a shelter basis for where you tend to be. I don't really view that as the end of the world here. And when you get to some of these articles, you'll see how they're suggesting that it is. So analysts believe the tariff impact is just showing to show up in the inflation numbers. And here we have the first clipping from the article. While the odds of the Federal Reserve cutting rates were already very small, we just went over that, they decreased. The latest information of these numbers, inflation, it's actually lower than we were expecting, and we had that preliminary number for quite some time. Just remember that. Bureau stated that CPI came out to 7, which we knew, and the 2.4. We knew this. Core CPI, which does not include food and energy, increased 2.9 versus 2.8. The increase was smaller than experts have forecasted. Yes, even though it was higher, experts had 3%. They came in at 2.9. And here's where they start breaking it down. The 2.2% increase in shelter costs was the primary factor for all the items' monthly increase. 0.2% increase in shelter costs was the primary factor for all the items' monthly increase. Shelter has increased by 3.8% year over year. Now, when I showed you that chart, this is exactly where you were right before the pandemic. This should not be this huge shock. Housing furnishings and operations rose 1% after 3% in May. Now, this could be why names like Arete came in today. Many experts believe tariff may have directly contributed to the larger increase. That's very well could be the case. They could have front-loaded everything and marked everything up already. That's very well could be the case, and that could continue. This is valid. I'm surprised that you're seeing it that soon, but it's something to look at. Housing affordability challenges combined with the elevated interest rate have led to slowdown in housing purchase market. If it's slowing down the housing purchase market, then why are shelter costs going up? Analysts believe the initial impact of the Trump administration aggressive tariffs should be showing up in July numbers. I would actually argue that the reason for the housing affordability is because a bunch of people moved to areas that they may or may not to want to have moved to, and then they moved back to other areas. And then the places that they wanted to live are no longer available. I think that a lot of this had to do with the migration. You had the Great Migration, and then a lot of people did move back to where they were before. Analysts believe the initial impact of the Trump administration aggressive tariff policy could be showing up in the July numbers. This doesn't include the new threatened tariffs against Canada, European Union. August 1st, yes, new tariffs. They even went after the tomatoes recently, I believe. So, Jerome Powell, and I know I get a lot of grief for this, because I don't really like Itchy. I think he's the worst Fed chair I've had in 26 years of trading. But I will say this. I don't know how you're supposed to cut rates if you don't know what the tariffs are. I just don't know how you're supposed to say that this is where pricing's going to be and we have pricing stability if you don't know where the tariffs are. I don't think it's a ridiculous request, candidly. Now, as always, I love your comments. I was reading them yesterday and people were saying, he just tells you what's going on. Yeah, anyone that predicts, run away screaming. What you do is you analyze and you make the best decision you can. If anyone told you today that inflation was going to drop and that you were going to have less of a chance of a rate cut and that IWM was going to roll over on that, nobody had that on their bingo card, just so we're clear. While today's CPI release showed some early signs of tariff impact, the whole underlying inflation remains muted. And this is Kay from the Global Head of Fixed Income and Liquidity Solutions. Okay. At GSAM. High warrants price pressure is expected to strengthen over the summer. Now, this is the part that I think should just scare us a little bit. Do we start to see an increase? And if we do, then this may become a problem. Expects the Fed to remain wait-and-see mode. I agree. Rate cuts could resume in the fall if underlying inflation continues to prove benign. If you start seeing an uptick in inflation and all of a sudden it just keeps rising, they're not cutting in September. They're not going to. Futures are now pricing in a 60% chance that'll drop. Fed next meeting, Tuesday, July. We all know this. CPI in the books. economists, strategists have to say. I'm not going to go into the comments. Bottom line is a bunch of people that have no idea are going to say some things. What you need to focus on is this is what everybody's paying attention to. And even when you got what was supposed to happen today, we got an opposite reaction to it. And I think that's very important. Now, what was interesting about this from the home furnishing side, this looked exactly as if somebody was out there just waiting to short these names, and you could just see how that collapsed, automatically just outright collapsed, and it did. Wayfair came in, Restoration Hardware came in, and why? Because if the costs are going up, then people are going to buy less, and this is going to become an issue. If we really look here on the earnings front, from April 3rd, they told us this was coming. They reiterated it here, and we've done nothing but drop. So can this get worse? Restoration Hardware can definitely get worse. I mean, this could 100% get worse. This is really setting up to really break down again. And sadly, it's not really what you want to see, but there it is, especially closing below that 55-day moving average. It's certainly not something that you want to pay attention to, or not that you don't want to pay attention to it. I should say it that way, especially if you're looking for something to short. If you look at it from the standpoint of, Wayfair, you've got a much, much harder time to come down. But Restoration Hardware, people love to short that one. The other thing that I would say that I was just very surprised from was just how fast they just dropped on the regional banks. They couldn't get out of regionals fast enough. And look at the home builders. They just got out. It was like, oh, well, they're done. There's no rate cut coming now. All based upon numbers that were actually less than expected. And all of it, and I want to be really clear about this, if you go back to what I went over, all of it was because of shelter costs. That's the whole increase. And what they're saying is, by the other slides that I showed you, is that shelter's setting up to come in. So I think that that is something that people are not playing with. And I think that, please comment on it, because I'm always interested what you guys think. But I don't think people are really registering that. Now, what I saw today was just an overreaction, in my opinion. And I shouldn't say it's an overreaction, because the reaction is the reaction. But they couldn't get out fast enough. I mean, that's a black Marbuzo sitting at the top of the chart. It's not really what you want to see. So when you see these kinds of bars, you can see right here, it tells you exactly what it is. There's no shadow. It's very rare that you just reverse on these. You did do it here. That encapsulated that bar too, which it's very rare that that happens, but it did happen. Usually when these whites and the blacks pick up, they do tend to mark a change in trend. If you go through this time and time again, you will see that you'll have follow through pretty consistently on them, because you don't have a shadow, meaning they just sold the open and just sold directly into the close, or bought the open and then from buying the open bought directly into the close. It can happen, but it's pretty darn rare that you see these kinds of flips. If you went through this historically, you'd see pretty decent numbers and pretty decent averages. So this has got to work itself out, and what this will become for us with the small cap sector, that'll actually just become a control bar right there, and something that we want to pay attention to. The biggest shock, I think, of today was the crypto week extravaganza we were supposed to have, and House members voted down a key procedural measure that would have cleared the way for votes on cryptocurrency related bill. Trump had declared Crypto Week on his social media account. How'd that go? And we all have seen these articles now. Crypto Week legislation hits snag, but let's take a look a little deeper. Long-awaited crypto legislation, U.S. Congress cast out Tuesday. Procedural vote, consider measures shot down in flames. Doesn't say that, I'm paraphrasing. House Republicans had bill this week, Crypto Week. How'd that go? We're keen to advance numerous pieces of legislation, clarity in the digital asset industry, legitimacy to the sector. But those efforts hit a snag. Yes, they did. So as we all know, both parties just vote down party line. It used to be that they used to vote locally. Now it's just like one big vote. But some conservative Republicans joined the Democrats. So the way that this voting worked, and you can go look at the voting, but all the Democrats said no, every single one of them. And then you had a bunch of Republicans that actually said, I'm not voting. And then you had some that said no. So you have three different categories in here. You have the no's, which was all the Democrats, and then some of the Republicans in here. And then you have the people that said, we're not voting. 13 people were that we're not voting people, and they were all Republicans except for two. And the reason I'm going through this is because if they come back in and vote, then it goes back to that percentage. The issue with this is, can they get this done? They're talking about getting this done tonight. At the time recording this, it was supposed to be 5. We'll see how this goes. But what really got me about this was, this is kind of a real issue there. Not because this is what the parties do. One side says this is good, the other side says this is bad, and then, they shake the jar, whatever. But what gets me about this is, how did the House Speaker not know that he didn't have the votes? How did you not know? And it's kind of crazy that you put it out there and not know that you don't have the votes. So I do find it interesting. Anyway, Circle came in, Coin came in. We're going to look at these charts in a second and walk through them. We're going to walk you through a trade that we did and then how you can duplicate that trade for yourself. But just so we're clear, this is all around stable coins, that constant value dollar peg. That bill and other houses could define crypto token as a commodity, which would be great if they could define what a token finally is. I mean, shouldn't take them a decade, but here we are. The House also was set to consider the bill would prohibit U.S. from issuing central bank digital currency. The House was also set to consider a bill that would prohibit the U.S. from issuing a central bank digital currency. Republicans say there is a risk that could give the government too much control over American personal finances. So what the conservatives on the Republican side are saying is, we want this linked to this bill because we don't want this, because if you get this, then they could turn on and off money. And that's a pickle. We don't want any side of anybody to be able to do that, right? I don't know how I feel about this, but I know procedurally what will happen here. If the Senate agreed on something, and then you have the House here, and the House disagrees on it, and the Senate agreed on something, and let's say the Senate agreed on two things, and they agreed on something here as well. They kick it back and say, we don't want this. We want this added to it. We want no, centralized currency from the U.S. added into it. And there's two things here, two separate bills, and they want those bills added together. What will happen is they have to kick it back to the Senate. If they have to kick it back to the Senate, these names are going to come in. Now, these names are not acting as if you're going to kick it back to the Senate. So what you have is you just have a good old-fashioned opened up, ramped, looked to get over 400. We had a nice day trade here, actually. Well, a couple bucks. Back down, tries again, complete Matumboed. And then the news hit on just how much of a kerfluffle, I guess I could say the word kerfluffle without people saying that you're taking one side over another. So you got to parse your words. So in other words, when you fell down, this 381 was a huge level because this is the opening IPO price on the stock. Meaning if you go all the way back here and you look at these levels, you're going to find out that right in here is your opening price. And then if you come to this, you're going to find out that that's the exact level that you've been wrestling with, or wrestling, however you crazy kids say it, for a while on that level. Bonk, 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 right? We've pointed this out ad nauseum. So test, retest, everybody knows what this is, this little area right here, and that area is a bearish engulfing. As soon as you have a bearish engulfing on a major support line, you're hosed. That's the technical term, hosed. And then you have your breakdown, and then you came to your other support line that was right here. And then all you're doing with that is marking off your supports and then watching how it reacts there. And then this was just relatively simple. What you're doing is you're just about 4x over on my vol line, my 1 minute vol line. And then on top of that, you are also have this huge positive divergence right here on the RSI, which is kind of crazy because people say RSI doesn't work. You can just send them a screenshot of this, and then you don't even have to say anything. So we did this trade in the room, and what we're doing is we're just monitoring it. I'm just watching when it starts coming out that it's not going to hold. Is it going to hold? Is it not going to hold? And then from there, you can see the dates up here. Then when it starts to crack, I'm thinking 381.57. But then we went through that like a hot knife through butter. You can see the timestamps here. And we're just watching that. It's a huge level, and we just really went through it. I should have said 381.57, but I was typing so fast. I figured the option market makers would want, or the option traders are going to want to know, because you got a bunch of guys in there trading options. So once you're slicing through that, you know that your next target is going to be this. Once you go through one, you move to your next demarcation line. Right. That's just the way it is. That's the way I do it. You should do it how you're comfortable with. And then I'm looking for 373.59 to see if that holds. And what you're actually going to see is that when this starts to break, by the time I could even get the darn thing out, I just typed it, what I saw, trimmed. I think the bill will pass. I already put that out there. But I'm trimming into it as it's rallying, and then I'm blowing the whole thing out. So I'm actually buying into this bar right here. Let me just show you. I'm buying actually right into this. I could do a whole video on this trade. If you guys want to see that, just type it in the comments, and I'll do it as a full video, because there's a couple moving parts to this. One, you have the positive divergence that's developing, but it's really, my trigger was this. That's what allowed me to get in so early, because I could see it developing on the RSI, but the trigger was the volume and the size of the two volume bars. So I should probably do a video on this. Just comment below if you want, if you're interested. So I'm buying into there, and then when it starts going up into this, I'm trimming. Like, I'm not waiting around. And this is perfect. It's called 3 white soldiers, 1, 2, 3. And it could have gone higher, and I could have stayed in there, but I could have rejected. And I'm looking at it and going, on the tail end of the trim, I'm getting $9. So what am I waiting for? Thank you very much, 3 minutes, move on, go into the next trade. And I tend to do that. I don't need to make every dollar, right? That's not really the way that I trade. So, but just comment on it if you want to go through it. And of course, that spread like wildfire through all these different names, MSTR collapsing, hood collapsing. And the bottom line with all of this is it doesn't matter. They're going to pass it. It's just a function of when, right? They will pass it. But I think it's up to us to understand that. A lot of us are talking about this pattern here. And why I'm on this, make sure that if you're trying to get into the community, there's only 3 days left. You should have a letter in your inbox if you're on the wait list, or if you've been on the wait list for a period of time, you should see something. If you're trying to get on the wait list, link in description to get into the community. But you're inside. Everyone's talking about this double inside day. It doesn't mean anything until this passes. Remember, think of the stool, macro, fundamental, technical. If you don't have the impetus, your double inside day doesn't mean, I don't know how else to say, guys. That's it.